Hello, Man in Gray here with another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is My Struggle, Book 1 by Karl Knausgaard, translated from Norwegian by Dawn Bartlett, and published in 2012 by Farr, Straus, and Giroux. It's 442 pages. My Struggle, Volume 1, is the first part of a six-volume set of autobiographical novels. It's basically autofiction, kind of fictionalized memoirs. Some people consider the whole thing one gigantic novel. The whole thing is over 3,000, I think it's like 3,600 pages, almost 4,000 pages. Other people consider it a novel series. Doesn't really matter. It's one of the biggest selling sets of books ever come out of Norway that made Knausgaard famous worldwide. But it also created a lot of controversy. And there's controversies over this book and this series in multiple levels. One controversy is, of course, the title, My Struggle, which in German is Mein Kampf, the same name that Adolf Hitler used for his infamous 1920s memoir where he laid out his Nazi agenda for Europe. Many people, when this first book came out, were offended that he would use the same title as Hitler's book. The struggle that Knausgaard is talking about here is not the struggle for Nazism to take over the world or fascism. It's personal struggle. The one theme all these six books have in common is Knausgaard's struggle to become a writer. He had this ambition from early on that he wanted to be a writer and he wanted to become famous as a writer. And he details all the obstacles that were put in his way. His parents' opposition, his family's opposition, his friends' opposition, his poverty as a young man, struggled to try to write while raising children, small children, and his wife's emotional difficulties, her emotional breakdown. And then, of course, in the later books, he talks about the pushback that the Norwegian people, some of the people in Norway were upset with his books, and he had to deal with that as well. So that's one controversy, is the title of the book. Another controversy was kind of an internal one within his family. Before he published this book, he passed out the manuscript to members of his family to read over. Some of them had no problem with it, but others, particularly on his father's side, were very upset about the way he portrayed his father and other members of the family. And they went so far as to go to court and try to sue him to keep him from publishing the book. And even after the books came out and became famous and he became this famous writer, there's still members of his family that won't have anything to do with him and won't speak to him because they feel like he's aired their dirty laundry in front of the whole public. And yet another controversy is over the literary quality of the book itself. These books have really kind of polarized readers. They fall into one of two categories usually. The larger group are people that really admire these books. There's some people that go so far as to compare them to Proust and say that he's one of the greatest writers of the 21st century, and these My Struggle books are among the greatest novels written so far this century, while others dismiss him as not good at all. They say that his books are self-indulgent, boring, and he's basically a literary fraud. Now, I, of course, as usual, come down kind of in the middle. The books are way too long. They could do with some editing, but I see the point that he's trying to make. Essentially, what's going on in these books is he goes into extreme detail about mundane events. For example, in the second book, book 2, it opens with a trip that he and his wife and his small children took to a carnival or fair. And he goes on page after page as to, the rides the kids got on, the food they were eating, his attempts to smoke cigarettes, the trash that he saw blowing around the carnival grounds, and then his struggle to get everybody together and get back to the parking lot and get out of there and how difficult it was, the crowds and everything. And he goes on for page after page after page about this routine visit to a fair. And then ultimately, that scene doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of the book. And so you can see people saying, well, what's the point of this? Why not cut all that out? Why are you going into all this detail? But other people who read that will say, oh, my God, I've been exactly through the same thing. I took my kids to Disney World, and we went through all the same stuff that he's talking about here. So the fans of Knausgaard really revel in all the detail because they see it reflecting real life. A lot of people consider these books to be the most true to life, most hyper-realistic books that they've ever read. And basically, I can tell you that if you read this book, or if you start reading this book, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to read 100 pages into it, then you're going to say, this is not for me, and you're going to put it on a shelf and you're never going to look at it again. Or You're going to read the entire book straight through, and then you're going to say, I've got to get volume 2. I've got to read this whole thing. There are some people who've read all 3,600 pages of this one right after the other, one book right after the other, because they just become obsessed with it. When they're not sleeping, working, or eating, driving, or whatever, they're reading this book, and they just kind of live in Knausgaard's world. So that's one thing. It kind of splits people in two different directions as to whether its literary quality is all it's set up to be. So let me tell you a little bit about this book itself, the first volume. It's one of the shorter books, even though it's over 400 pages, almost 450 pages. It's basically split into two parts. The first part, the opening section, takes place when Knausgaard is a teenager, and he's trying to figure out what to do with his life. And he's living with his father, who is his father is a brilliant professor, but he's got a drinking problem, and he's split from his wife, and so he's living with his father when he's not staying at school. He kind of switches back and forth between boarding at school and staying with his father. And the main plot of the first section is he's trying to get some beer. He's underage. He comes up with this elaborate plan to have somebody buy beer for him. He and his friend are going to go sneak out and go drinking and hopefully pick up girls. And they're trying to do this all under his father's suspicious. His father is not physically abusive, but he's very emotionally abusive to young Karl. He's always putting his son down and making him out to be stupid and lazy and incompetent, and so he's trying to sneak this beer in. So it's a typical teenage rebellion story. He also goes into he's in a band, and he kind of split between wanting to be a writer and being a rock star, something like that. And then the second part, which is a little bit longer and it's more substantial, takes place many years later when his father has died suddenly. His father has turned into this terrible alcoholic. He lost his job. He lost his family. He's basically living on welfare, and he's staying with his mother, Karl's grandmother's house. His grandmother is kind of half senile. She kind of comes in and out of reality. And he just sat there and drank himself to death, basically died sitting in a sofa. And so Karl and his brother show up after they've been notified that his father's died. His body's been taken off to the funeral home. They show up, and the house is in a complete wreck. It's like the hoarder's worst nightmare. It's just jammed to the rafters with old beer bottles and food, and there's bugs everywhere, cockroaches everywhere. It stinks. They even find some human feces lying around. And he goes into extreme detail about cleaning this house up. They're trying to get the house cleaned up before the funeral, because all of his family members are going to want to come back to the mother's house, the grandmother's house, and it's horrible looking. It's embarrassing to them, and so they're trying to get everything. They go around, pick up all the bottles and the cans, the trash, and they're taking the bottles out to get them recycled at a nearby store. And at the same time, Karl's trying to figure out how to get the funeral arrangements done. Who are they going to get to do the funeral? Where they're going to have it at? When? All the details that you have to do. At the same time, he's grieving for his father. He and his father, didn't get along. They had a long period of estrangement, but he still loved his father, and he was horrified to see how low that he had fallen. That he'd gotten to this point where this brilliant professor had become this pathetic alcoholic who just sat and drank himself into oblivion. And then, of course, his grandmother is having trouble dealing with anything because she's kind of in and out of reality, and so he's trying to deal with that. And then he's also worried about getting back home because he's got a book he's writing, and he's trying to get that done in time. He's trying to work out the flights, the flying back to his hometown and so forth. So it's a lot of routine details about the funeral arrangements and cleaning this house. And he goes on and on and on in extreme detail about cleaning this incredibly filthy house and how repugnant it was to him. And that's basically it. I mean, that's the thing about all these books is there's not a whole lot of plot in any of them. There's just, he takes one section of his life and deals with it in extreme detail. So, as I said, you'll either want to read this thing all the way through because you're just fascinated with it's really, there is kind of a voyeuristic thrill to looking in on this guy's life because he doesn't hold anything back. He tells you exactly what his father's life was like, his life was like, and growing up, everything. He doesn't hold back anything. But at the same time, he goes into all these details about things that aren't really that important. How hard it was to get the bottles recycled to this place and trying to trying to catch the minister on the phone and talk him into doing the funeral arrangements and so forth. But if you've ever gone through something like that, if you've had to handle funeral arrangements for a loved one, you're kind of in the same spot. You're grieving, but you're having to deal with all these mundane matters: the flowers, what casket, when the funeral is going to be, where it's going to be, how, all the details. You have to decide all of this right now. You can't put any of that off. And so, if you've gone through that, you'll probably really relate to this. And so once again, there's a lot of this that's true to life, no matter where you are. If you're not Norwegian, you can still relate to it. So you'll either love this book or you're not going to like it at all. Or you may be like me and kind of love parts of it, but don't like other parts of it. The book is My Struggle, Book 1 by Karl Ove Knausgaard. This has been another Man and Great Book Review. Thanks for watching.